Welcome to the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. Jennifer McGraw writes nonfiction history focusing on the 1600s in the Michilimackinac region. Her latest book, The Unsolved Mysteries of Father Marquette's Many Graves, follows other books or booklets she has authored, including Lawless Mackinac and the David Haynes Dig. She is also co-author of a collection of writings called The Reminiscences of David Corp, co-authored with Prentiss M. Brown Jr.
It's nice to see so many people on, and I know more people might be joining us, which is great. And I welcome Jennifer, who's going to be talking to us tonight about the unsolved mysteries of Father Marquette's graves. Victor and the Friends of the Crystal Falls Library, and Victor being the president of UPPAA, which is the Upper Peninsula Publishers and Authors Association. Both of those organizations help sponsor these events, and we do pay the authors who have been awarded the award to speak to us, a small stipend. And so because of that generosity by my friend Victor, he gets to talk and tell us wonderful things about what's happening with the Upper Peninsula Publishers and Authors Association. So take it away, Victor.
Thank you, Evelyn. I am really excited to announce tonight that we have just opened the registration for the Young Writers Storytelling Workshop, which is open to students all over the UP in grades 5 through 12. This is the first time it's ever been held, and that will be on May 18th, 2024. It will happen simultaneously with the UPPAA Spring Conference and at the same place. So it's a great opportunity. If you have a son or daughter, grandchild, niece, nephew that's interested in writing, it's a full day workshop. We take them through a review of the basics like conflict and character development and so on, so their writing skills will increase, and it's designed to be fun. And there's lots of fun interactive exercises, and it's only $15. It's the educational bargain of the century. We just want to have as many students participate as we can, and there's even a few need-based scholarships. So if you're having trouble making that, we can help you with that too. So to get started, head on over to UPPAA.org/storytelling. That's UPPA.org/storytelling, and all the information is there. And we hope to have a room full of excited young students ready to write on May 18th.
That's exciting. We've got here, at the library, we have a young adult group that meets once a month. Tyler came and spoke to them because they read Frankenstein. And so in October, Tyler did a talk about Gothic literature with them. And some of the kids in that group are really into writing. So I got your press release today and I made some copies. Hopefully we can get some people from Crystal Falls to come up for that day. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yay, go Crystal Falls.
Yeah. All right. Well, without any further ado, I guess some calendar items. So for those of you who are not aware, last month we met with Matthew Hellman. At least we met with his picture. We couldn't hear him at all. So we tried to do a little bit on the chat, but of course that it's hard to have a discussion that way. So he is going to join us next month, the month of March, which I think is great, because if any of you have not read The Biting Cold by Matthew Hellman, please get a copy and read it. You will like it. It was kind of a hands down favorite by many of the people in the book group that met last time. So it gives you a chance to read the book. It goes pretty fast, and I think we'll all enjoy the talk with Matthew. Tonight, though, we are so lucky to have Jennifer with us. And we were talking a little bit about her book and being a UP Notable Award winner just before many of you got on. And she was telling us how exciting it was. So I learned a lot from reading this book. I was kind of like, wow, a lot of things I didn't really know. So you enlightened me, and we'd love to hear you talk more about it. So would you like to just start by speaking, or do you want to do questions and answers, or how would you like to do it, Jennifer?
Well, I have some notes. I kind of plan to just talk about the book for a little while, and however you want is fine with me. I don't have a
Most of our people do that. They start off talking, and then we might interrupt with a question, or we can have questions at the end.
okay. That's great.
Okay,
So should I just start then?
sure.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Jennifer McGraw, and thank you for your interest. I really appreciate that you have signed in for this. And so I guess I'll start by talking about myself for a second, so you know who I am. And so I'm the author of 4 books or booklets. The first is a collection of stories written by David Corp, and I'm a co-author of that. And they center around the fishing industry in Lake Michigan in the mid to late 1800s. And then I have a book about a man named David Haynes who dug up a skull in his yard, and come to find out he had a 1,000-year-old skeleton and 12 more in addition to that. And it was just mostly about his story of finding them and what he did next. And then I have a book called Lawless, Mackinac, which is just a general history of what life was like here in the late 1600s, when there were forts in the Sioux, and there were 5 forts in St. Ignace, and there were soldiers that lived here, what life was like then. And the book we're talking about tonight is The Unsolved Mysteries of Father Marquette's Many Graves. And a little bit more, I do some speaking also, and I've given interviews to PS. I've given interviews to the History Channel that never aired. And I have a little cable TV show that just is me, and I'm just talking about the 1600s in Michigan. And I'm sure it only airs at 2 o'clock in the morning in like 3 little towns downstate. So but maybe one of the coolest things that I've ever done as far as speaking is I gave the keynote address to the Historical Society of Michigan's conference a few years ago, and there were about 500 people there, and it was fun. I really enjoyed it. But so you could tell by the list of books that I did that I really like the 1600s, and that's generally the history that I focus on, is the 1600s. And I find it really interesting because that's the time when the first Europeans arrived in Michigan. And so you've got a couple of things happening there, but you've got the Native American population at its least influenced point, and you've got written records that are coming out of Michigan. And so you've got the joining of those 2 cultures, and so that kind of a time that I really like to focus on. And if you can get around the French language barrier, which sometimes is a difficulty for me, there's a lot of information as far as biographies and military records, and Jesuit relations, which is 10,000 pages of missionary records that they were using actually as fundraising material. They would write about their life in the villages with the Native Americans, and they would send that back to France and hope people would send them money. And so it's a really interesting time, and it's the time when the Jesuit missionaries first show up, and the Jesuits were Catholics. They came to convert the Native American population to Catholicism. Can't say it right now, to the Catholic religion. And they came to keep an eye on the French fur traders that were here. And the French fur traders, if you really start to study them, surprisingly, they were very young. Sometimes they were teenagers. often they were teenagers or in their 20s, a time period where I always joke I still hadn't given my kids permission to ride their bikes on the road, but the French fur traders were coming across to this continent and going out on their own via canoe and living amongst the Native Americans. So my book is broken into two parts. It's broken into Father Marquette's life in North America, and the other part focuses on his multiple graves and the unsolved mysteries regarding his graves, and particularly the mysteries about the bones that they've found in St. Ignace and whether they are or are not his bones. And the book presents evidence that the evidence that led people to believe that those are his bones. And it presents the evidence that led people to doubt that we have actually found Marquette's bones. And I don't draw a conclusion in the book. And the truth is, if you want to know the truth, that I have not formed the conclusion, that I go back and forth, and some days I'm pretty sure that they're not his bones, and some days I'm pretty sure that they are his bones. So like I said, Father Marquette was a Jesuit missionary, and he came at a time that the Native American populations in Michigan were at war, and they were at war with the Iroquois tribes, which are 5 or 6 confederated tribes that live in the New York area. And they were at war, and a lot of our population had been at the time just prior east of Lake Huron. And because the Iroquois could come at them and attack relatively easily, then they relocated and moved up into areas of Michigan. And then they were still being attacked. So they moved even further to the far west end of Lake Superior. And so as this is happening, the Jesuits that are already in the Michigan area put word out to France that they could use some help. And so in 1668, they bring Marquette to Michigan, and he establishes the first mission in Sault Ste. Marie. It was the 3rd attempt at establishing a mission in Sault Ste. Marie. They tried in 1641. They sent 2 missionaries to Sault Ste. Marie, and one of them got sick, and they returned before building any buildings, or really not having been there very long. They returned back to east of Lake Huron when that missionary that was ill, he passed away. And then again in 1656, they tried to establish a mission in Sault Ste. Marie, and they sent a Jesuit named Garreau to establish that mission. And he was on his way, and he was shot in the spine by some Iroquois on the St. Lawrence River. And so that mission attempt again failed. So in 1668, they sent Marquette, and Marquette arrived. Contrary to a lot of the information that we see, he arrived with laymen and also slaves, and together they built a fort, a living quarters, and a chapel. And at that time, or right around that time, there was also a Native American fort, at least one Native American fort in Sault Ste. Marie. There may have been others, but there's at least one identified in some of the writings. And so in 1669, Father Marquette met Louis Joliet, who and an explorer, and he also was a government employee. He was supposed to be scouting for valuable minerals when he was there. And according to some sources, the two became friends, and they were hearing information from the Native Americans that lived in the village that there was a huge river that was off to the west. And at the time, the French were looking for passages to Asia. They were looking for more fur trade territory, and Joliet and Marquette asked for permission because it was required that they get permission. They asked for permission to explore the river. But before they actually did, Marquette was sent further to the west to the La Pointe area, Ashland, Wisconsin. It goes by many names, the Apostle Islands. He was sent there, and he was a minister among the tribes that were, again, refugees from the Iroquois that lived over in that direction. Oops, sorry, I didn't expect the real phone to ring. So he was there for a time. He was seasonally traveling back and forth to the Sioux, and Joliet was still there. And there became a problem between the Sioux, and by Sioux, I mean Sioux, otherwise known as Dakota, Lakota, or Nakota, who lived in the area to the west end of Lake Superior. And they really didn't like having these refugee native populations right near them. And so they began skirmishing, and it became a problem. And so then in 1671, Marquette and along with the native populations of the Michigan tribes, the Chippewa, the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, there were many tribes that were located there that were refugees, but they moved again back to the east, and this time Marquette was put in St. Ignace, and so he started over again. They built a fort, they built living quarters, they built a chapel, and soon, 2 years later, he got word that Louis Joliet and he were going to go and explore the Mississippi. So Louis Joliet arrived in approximately the prior December, and they prepared throughout the winter, and in the spring, in May, they took off, and they had 5 Frenchmen with them. They formed a company because the French government would not pay for the trip, even though it was a government sanctioned trip. It was something that the explorers themselves were required to pay for, and they paid for that by trading furs along the way. And they went down the Mississippi. They would take their canoe and anchor out in the middle of the river at night for safety, and they were concerned for their own lives. They went as far south as the Arkansas River, and they realized that they were getting into the territory of the Spanish, and the Spanish allies had been armed with guns, and they feared for their own safety and for the safety of the records that they were creating by recording what was happening on the exploration. And so they turned back to the north. And during this time period, Marquette became sick with dysentery. And the record doesn't really show specifically what caused it. It could have been many things. He only came back as far as the St. Francis Xavier mission in Green Bay, and he stayed there for a year. And then then after a year of recovery, he went south, and he wanted to form a mission among the Illinois tribe. And contrary to what we have all been told, Marquette was a slaveholder and definitely had at least 2 Native American slaves, and one of them was in Illinois. And he spoke the language of the Illinois, and he had a great affection for the slave, and so he had always wanted to form a mission among them. So he did that, and he went south and formed a mission among them, and it went pretty well, but he was still sick, and so he decided then in 1675 that he needed to come north back and try and get back to St. Ignace. And the I believe it's Jesuit Relations is the source, and they say that the Native Americans carried his personal effects for the first 90 miles. So he was loved among the Illinois. And so he and two Frenchmen who accompanied him, they came north along the east side of Lake Michigan, got as far north as Ludington area, although that's a debated fact. And he died, and they per his request buried him there under a simple wooden cross, which I find to always be pretty ironic, because this man has got rivers and towns and monuments and a railroad named after him, and all he really wanted in death was a simple wooden cross. And upon his death, he became the first known European to die in Michigan, on Michigan soil. And so it's by far not the end of his story, though. His story goes on. And in 1677, a group of his parishioners, led by the Ottawa, and those Ottawa Odawa, would be the ancestors of the Little Travers Band, and also what we would refer to around here as the Ants Band or the Mackinac Band. And so those Ottawa returned to the site of the wooden cross, and there were 30 canoes of his parishioners that went, and they dug up his body, and the record says, quote, they found it whole, and then they stripped the flesh from the bones. They likely cremated the flesh, although it does not say that they cremated the flesh, but it does say that they stripped the flesh from the bones. And then they took his skeleton and they did what they call disarticulated it, or broke the bones apart at the joints, put them in a birch bark box, and they canoed back to St. Ignace with his bones. When they got to St. Ignace, which was in June of 1677, they were immediately approached by the resident priest, who demanded that they prove or confirm that they had Father Marquette, and they took his bones and performed a Catholic ceremony, and they buried him in a vault beneath the church. It makes this a good time for any questions about Father Marquette's life. Anybody have one? Okay, we can continue on to what happens then with his burials, because he's been buried and dug up several times, or maybe he hasn't. I guess that's what we're talking about. So in 1877, a man named Peter D. Grandin was clearing a lot in St. Ignace. And if anybody is familiar with St. Ignace, we're a town that is built along a C-shaped bay. And so this lot would have been at the very backside of the bay. And that's where the Jesuit Relations and military records say that that the Jesuit chapel was. And so this lot that Peter D. Grandin was clearing had a foundation on it, which was approximately 36 by 40. It was made out of limestone, and they the people of the town had been hearing about Father Marquette, and they concluded that it was possibly the site of Marquette's chapel. And so this lot was owned by someone named Patrick Murray. And the Murrays had owned the lot like 25 years and hadn't touched it. And no one in living memory remembered there having been a house on it or any other structure. And so they started debating whether it could possibly be the chapel site. And they also started digging, and they started digging and finding a few artifacts that made sense that they might be of Catholic origin. And so they called the local parish priest, whose name is Edward Jacker or Edward Yacker, because that J is probably pronounced Y in his country of origin. And so they found that this foundation had what appeared to be a fort wall to the north, and there were maps from the 1600s that indicated that the Jesuit fort, because the Jesuits had a fort, it was right next to a Huron fort, and so then that is a clue. And then they found 7 or 8 small foundations, which were had chimneys and had lime in the soil, and they presumed that they could have been French cabins. And there is a map that shows that there were French cabins just to the south of the Jesuit fort. So again, they had more supporting evidence. And then as they're doing this digging, they find first 3 small fragments of bone, and then a man named Joseph Marley finds another 36 small fragments of bone. And so Father Jacker, who did most of the recording of what happened then, he sometimes says 36 pieces of bone. Sometimes he says 39. He says anything between the two, but the number of bone fragments is between 36 and 39. And just less than an ounce, they figure, of bones. And just for reference, Marquette's skeleton would have weighed between 15 and 20 pounds live weight, and it would contain a dozen bones of 10 to 20 inches, and it would contain about 194 other bones. So the finding at that time was about an ounce of bones and between 39 fragments. So again, they're collecting evidence, and Father Jack actually writing some of the most famous historians in the United States and receiving information back from them in the form of maps and so on that support the finding. And the circumstantial evidence is pretty good. In the meantime, though, what was happening, people were coming, they were getting off boats, they were being handed shovels, and they were just digging. Children were digging, adults were digging, they were throwing soil all over the place. There was no methodology to what they were doing. So, and this becomes an issue kind of later. So again, the arguments are lining up for and against whether they've actually found the site of the Marquette Mission Chapel and also Marquette's bones. And they're amassing artifacts as they're doing this digging. They're finding crosses and Jesuit rings, little rings that would be given to the parishioners as a reward for being pious, for instance. They're finding pieces of metal, which they feel supports the fact that they've found the Jesuit chapel, because they knew that it had perhaps a forge, and they had metalworking ability, and that they would use that metalworking ability to both trade, and also they would use it to reward their parishioners again, and they would use metal repairs that they would do on site, again, to trade or to get labor. They would use it for various things. So another piece of evidence that they found is that an oral history surfaced that said that there had been a black cross that stood on that site, not recent to 1877, but in the memories of some of the oldest citizens in the town, there had been a black cross that had stood there. And then they also found in oral history that some of the Native American elders from the area would stop there and pray, and nobody knew exactly what the origin of that tradition was, but they found in oral history that existed. So there was a lot of circumstantial evidence that the foundation and the bones were in fact related to Marquette. And but there were debates, and it wasn't exactly a given that they had found it. And of course, one of the first things that they debated is, why is there 1 ounce of bones here? Why are there 36 to 39 little fragments when we're really looking at close to 200 bones that would have existed in his skeleton? And there were debates about some of the other things that were taken as, for instance, they took birch bark, the existence of birch bark within the digging to have meant that they found pieces of Father Marquette's little birch bark coffin. But in fact, birch bark was a really common substance used for cooking and fires and all kinds of things in Native American villages. And they had also taken pieces of charred material to be a clue that they had found the former Jesuit mission, but they had problems with fire all the time in villages in the 1600s. Everything was made out of wood, and they cooked with wood, and they heated with wood. So it was a big issue they feared all the time. So charred material didn't really mean a whole lot. So regardless of the debates, there was enough support that in 1882 they built a monument to Father Marquette on the site of what we now call the Ojibwe Museum, the Ojibwa Museum in St. Ignace. And they then started to have debates about what would happen to the 36 to 39 bone fragments. And so when they built the monument, they took 7 pieces of the bone fragments and they buried them under the monument. They took 19 pieces of the bone fragments and at Father Jacker arranged it, and Father Jacker sent the 19 pieces to Marquette University in Wisconsin for safekeeping. And other pieces, the remaining pieces, some of them were given away as souvenirs. An account surfaced in the last few years that was a priest in the northern lower, and he had one of the bone fragments that he kept in his vest pocket. And you know, who knows what has happened to it. So the 19 pieces, the 19 bone fragments were returned to St. Ignace in 2022. But before they were returned here, I had called Marquette University, I don't know how many times. And the same thing would happen. I would call, I would say, I'm researching Father Marquette, I'm writing a book. Could you let me speak to whoever it is who knows about Marquette's bones? And they would go, bones? we don't have Marquette's bones. And that would be the end of the conversation. And so I would make this phone call again and again, and I would get the same response. We don't know anything about any bones. And then one day I called and I said, I'd like to talk to somebody about Marquette's bones. And they said, yes, she'll be back after lunch. And so I was able to interview the lady who actually basically had custody of Father Marquette's bones, the purported bones, I should say, because it's not really been proven. It's still circumstantial evidence, but the 19 bone fragments that were sent to Marquette University were stored in the archives at Marquette University. They weren't on display. They were in little paper boxes. They had been there for more than 100 years. They were sealed with wax seals, and only one of those little boxes was ever opened, and it was opened to do x-rays of the bone fragments that are within the boxes. And the archivist said that the x-rays seemed to indicate that the bones were human. And so they had never done DNA or radiocarbon testing on these bone fragments. And they said their reasoning was as the likely remains of a sacred individual, they would not drill into them or destroy them in any way. And DNA testing and radiocarbon takes destroying a small amount of the tissue, so they would not be willing to have those tests done. So and here I want to lead to modern finding, because starting in about 1970, there were several archaeological digs done. In fact, there were years or decades of archaeological digs done at the site of the foundation. And the archaeologists had basically almost unanimously concluded that they did not think that that was the site of the Marquette mission. But and also the archaeologists retrieved the 7 bone fragments that were put under the monument that they built and tested those, and those 7 bone fragments were cow skull and animal bones. And but there is something about the archaeology that's kind of a couple of things. So when they started to do the archaeological testing, they right away they had an issue, which is that no one kept track of the exact site of the foundation. When they found it in 1877, they had to try and reconstruct from notes where that original foundation was at. And then they went from there with some difficulties with their survey work and trying to patch it all back together. They finally concluded that the specific site was the site of the 36 by 40 foundation. And they the site that they picked out is a site that had an outhouse built on it about 2 years after 2 years or just a couple of years after the finding of Marquette's grave site, if that is his grave site. And right before the monument, it had been backfilled with garbage, which to me has always been this really kind of something that just doesn't sit. So if you think you found the grave of a sacred and individual, then you quit digging, and then you put an outhouse on that site and also fill garbage. So that part of the story, and I'm glad to see a couple people shake their head. So that part of the story to me kind of doesn't make sense. Like if being that the whole town was so excited to find him, to find these remains, find this foundation, and that they wanted to build a monument, that they then in the intervening years fill the area with garbage and an outhouse. It doesn't really make sense. So in conclusion, I would say, people ask me all the time, what do I think? Do we have Marquette's bones or do we not have Marquette's bones? And sometimes I just say, I'm not sure it matters. Either the bones that we do have are a great reminder of our history and get people excited about learning more about our history. So if they're not Marquette, they're still wonderful for learning, and they're still inspiring. And also they could very well be somebody's bones, and those bones don't belong in an archive department in Wisconsin. They belong where they came from, amongst their people. And but if they are Marquette, it definitely belong here, and we'll never solve the puzzle of the other basically 200-ish bones that are missing if we're missing some of the parts. So so that's it for me. I'm glad to take questions if anybody has any.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. Yes. I'm kind of looking out in the audience there. I've got my gallery view up. It's so nice to see other fellow UP notable books authors with us tonight, past and present for 2024. Does anyone have any questions for Jennifer? Okay, Diana, can you unmute yourself? Okay, it looks like she might be trying to unmute herself. Let's hope. Does she know how to unmute herself? So Diana, in the left-hand corner, there's a button that says mute. You pull it up, you can hit unmute.
Got
There we go.
In 2020, John, 2022, my husband before that had been asked by an Episcopal priest who was in his 80s that those bones should not stay down at Marquette University. So the Native Americans came to John and he set up a program, got funding. They went down and got them and brought them up and had a big celebration up in Saint Ignace run by the natives and the History Museum. And now they're reburied under the statue.
Right. Yes. So this must be John Magnuson.
Yes.
Is that? Yes. Okay. So, and I spent, it sounds like he's just off the screen from you, but I spent last night with Tony Grondin and Russ Rickley, and they are part of the team of people that brought the 19 bone fragments back from Marquette University, and so that to me is really interesting for a couple of reasons. Like I said, it needed to be done, and I'm so glad that it was done. And in fact, I donated some money toward. Nice to see you. I donated some money toward the project. I thought it was just wonderful, and it actually was announced that they were bringing this back, like the same week I announced that I had written a book on the subject. Sure. The timing could not have been more amazing, to tell you the truth. Right. And so this team of about 10 people, and I'm not an expert on it because you guys haven't really talked much about everything that they went, and with Native American ceremony, they brought the bone fragments back from Marquette University and buried them under a limestone slab at the mission site. And I think it's awesome that you guys did that. I think it's really amazing. And last night, even I was talking about it with Tony and Russ Rickley, two of the Native Americans who helped put the ceremony together. And I'd really like you guys to tell your story.
Well, thank you. Jim Boynton, who is a Jesuit brother, who we all know grew up in St. Ignace, and now is living in Detroit. Yeah, he spoke. He was the only non-Indian who spoke at the ceremony. The Native community put the bones back, and there was a delegation from Marquette University that also joined us, and the Jesuit priest who first called me in 2018 from Kentucky, saying that he was 89 years old and that he was soon going to die. And he said, I have been in the archives of Marquette University, and he basically received the same message that you did, which was, they're not on display. We don't have any bones. And he found them. He worked for the university, found them. And then he called me and said, I've been trying for 15 years to get these back. And I said to him, they're not going to come back unless the Native people, who are the descendants of that community, want the bones back. They have to be the ones to make the request. So Shirley Sorrells was then director of the Ojibwa Museum. She wrote the letter to the president of Marquette University and said, we respectfully want to invite you to consider returning the bones. And so that's how that story unfolded. There is if you can remember, cedartreeinstitute.org, if you go on, there is a documentary called The Return, which was essentially filmed. It's in St. Ignace in 2022. And Tony's in it, Russ is in it, Shirley's in it, Jim Boynton, the ceremony is in it. It's 21 minutes long, but there are pictures of Marquette University, the ceremony that took place there, the transfer of the bones. So, that's in for historical record, and the museum has a copy of that DVD. So I think what you've done is a beautiful thing by your history, and Prentiss Brown was right there I had seen him in 2022 and said to him, Prentiss, if this ever happens, you will be by my side when those bones are put back in the ground, because he was president of the Historical Society for many years in St. Ignace, and there he was, age 96. Sitting with my wife. So it all came together with your book and the ceremony, and I think and the pressure on the university.
The Jesuit seminary put big pressure on the
there's always backstories to history. So some things will not always be in written history, but you can imagine what it was like, the negotiations to bring the bones back, because we initially had the same response as you did when you inquired.
Right. Yes.
That there was a denial, but since our Jesuit friends had seen the bones, had actually seen the small containers and knew they were there, he knew they were there. So that was, and of course, Jim Boynton did a beautiful work on behalf of the St. Ignace community. So you can thank you much for your great work, and history is just a marvelous, marvelous thing. And your wonderful research and beautiful.
Thank you. That's kind of you. Thank you. I see there's a, did you have more questions? I see there's a chat question here, so I'll read it here. If they're not Marquette's bones, do you have a theory for the story of going to Ludington to bring back his bones, and the Native Americans give the Jesuits some other what? Oh, I like that question. Okay, so, well, it's two questions. So I do not believe that they are not in St. Ignace. I believe absolutely that they're in St. Ignace. So if whether or not the 36 or 39 bone fragments are his, the other 190 bones are, I believe, still there. I believe they're within 200 feet of the identified spot, which supports the theory that the identified spot is right. I believe that they are still in Ludington or anywhere else, because it was just such a sensational story in the 1600s. It's very clearly outlined that they brought them back, and so hopefully that answers the question. Anybody else have one?
Okay, one from Tyler.
Okay.
Yeah, Jennifer, at first I thought your book was fabulous. I learned so much. I had absolutely no idea about all the different possibilities for bones. But my question is more a general one. Since I live in the town of Marquette, I'm kind of like obsessed with the city of Marquette, and of course it's named for Father Marquette. So I've heard different stories. Well, there is a legend that he supposedly stopped here in the bay where Marquette is founded and held a mass here and converted a bunch of the Native Americans, and that's why the city is named for him. But I don't believe there's any actual evidence of that. I don't know if you know if there's any evidence of that. And then the other part of my question is, what do you attribute to being the reason why, like over all the other French Canadian Jesuits of that period, why is his name and why is he so popular that so many things have been named after him? Because I've heard he's like the third or fourth most popular place name in the country.
So to start with, it's actually a really common question that I get asked is, what is the real relationship between Father Marquette and the town of Marquette? And in all of the records from the 1600s that I've read, which is a lot, and all of the biographies and all of the Jesuit relations and so on, I've never seen a specific statement that says that he stopped in and held this mass. Is kind of the legend. So that being said, like so for instance, in front of my house here, there are two areas, Point La Barbe and Gros Cap, and so those are native French origin that have were named in the 1600s, right? So is it possible that an oral history can actually survive that long? My answer to that would be yes. So so I can't, I tend to like to prove things black and white, so I can't really prove that black and white, but is it completely impossible that he held a mass there? No, I'm sorry. It is completely possible that he held a mass there and that the oral tradition just still exists. And then the second part of the question was, I'm sorry, I focused so much on the first part, I can't remember already.
Well, just why do you think his name is so popular that there are so many place names named after him? I mean, there's like at least 4 cities in Marquette.
Yeah, I agree. And I even tried at one point in time to see how many books were written about Father Marquette, and I could not even come close. I would say thousands, right? And I wasn't sure even if I wanted to write another one, but it is a subject that's not really covered so much. But I have a couple of reasons. He was the first European to die on Michigan soil. So when that is who you are, you're important. But also though, just the graphic details of the body preparation that took place, and even though it's only a few sentences in Jesuit relations, it sure is a memorable thing when they start talking about stripping the flesh from his bones and disarticulating them. And so I think that that also led to his lasting fame.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I have one question. I was just, well, I really, again, like Tyler said, I really enjoyed your book and I learned a lot of things that I did not know. I'm always, being a former English teacher, I'm just so impressed with this wonderful bibliography you have in the back of all the research you did. And that's kind of leads me to my question, these Jesuit relations. You do a lot of referencing that. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Is that just a big series of books? Where are they? And did you read them cover to cover?
No, I did not read them cover to cover. So what they are is there's 73 volumes of missionary reports, basically from the 1600s. And the missionaries would record things like, this is the number of baptisms that we have undertaken since our last report, and they would also record little bits and pieces about Native American culture and things about what they ate. And for instance, one Jesuit survived for a while on crunchy dried frogs. So some of it is quite interesting, and some of it is pretty dry, right? But I'm able to take the reports and basically separate the reports from the Ottawa missions, which is the umbrella that they put the Michigan missions under, and separate those from, for instance, the reports from the Iroquois missions, unless I wanted to specifically focus on something from a certain year, because they're basically, each of the 72 volumes covers a year or two, and they end basically right about the time of Marquette's bones being returned to Saint Ignace. So I'm able to just read the Ottawa missions reports, and sometimes, I might branch off and read the reports from St. Francis Xavier in Green Bay, which is part of the Ottawa missions. But just kind of separate like that. So I haven't read all 10,000 pages. They're 10,000 pages, and they're written in both French and also in English. They would have one page French, and then the next page is the translation, and they are available online. And so that's nice too, because if you have something in particular you want to search for, you can search. But I do also have copies of a lot of books from that age here, and I have parts of Jesuit relations here in my library. So.
Oh, yeah, I was kind of curious about that. I thought that was kind of interesting myself when I was reading your work. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yes, and thank you for the compliments on the research, and I would like to say here that, like, I'm just a lady who started liking this kind of history and keeping notes on it, and then decided to write a book while I played online poker in my lazy boy at the same time, like, to be on the list of notable books. I mean, these authors are seriously have serious abilities, and I'm just kind of a hobbyist who kind of got obsessed.
Yeah, I think hobby kind of has a connotation of it as something being easy, and maybe it is easy because you're so interested in it, but I don't think what you did was easy. You did a lot of hard work, and a lot of research to make something very interesting to lay people that aren't devouring 1600 Michigan information. So really appreciative.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a nice Cliff Notes sort of for,
Yes.
to make it kind of come to life. That's art. That's not a hobby. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another chat message down here. I'll open it up here. Oh, okay. The French Canadian Heritage Society of Michigan is also good for information on the history of the French in Michigan. And yes, that is true. They are. And so then it shows the website https:// I think that's / www.habitant. Habitant means farmer or inhabitant. Basically, it means person. Heritage. So yes, especially my late husband was French Canadian and had fur trade family background, and I have visited the Habitant Heritage, and they are a great source. Okay. This says Peggy's supporting the Native Americans with her online poker. Great research and a labor of love. Super job. I appreciate that. If referring to me, I don't invest real money in my online poker. I only invest my ego, and I just like to win.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions or comments from the group before we kind of wrap up tonight's program?
Well,
one more.
I have one. I don't, and you don't have to answer if it's inappropriate, but would you be of Native American descent?
I am not of Native American descent, and I'm also not Catholic, which is I kind of get the rap for both with dark hair and also writing about the Catholic missionaries. My late husband was Chippewa, and so and I have a whole bunch of grandkids and a whole bunch of relatives who are Chippewa, and so yes, the answer is I have always been interested from a family perspective, but not my family, not my specific lineage.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jennifer. Like I hope for those of you who haven't read the book, it's not long and you'll learn an awful lot. I mean, Jennifer covered quite a bit of the book here, but she certainly didn't cover everything. There was really a lot of surprises to me, along the way. And having been, well, from the Upper Peninsula and being 50 years old, I thought I knew a lot more things than I guess I did. So this was a good book. Thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Yeah.
And talking.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you all back. The date will be, I'm just going to double check here the calendar, but I think it is on March 14th, and we will be back with Matthew Hellman to talk about the biting cold. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you to the UP Publishers and Authors Association. And thank you to the Crystal Falls Library. And thank you, Victor. And thank you, Evelyn. I really appreciate it.
You've been watching the UP Notable Books Club, brought to you by the Upper Peninsula Publisher and Authors Association. To join or for more information, please visit us at www.upaa.org or www.upnotable.com.